The topic of today's discussion about security law is very relevant, not just from the legal point of view, but also from the financial health point of view, because immediately after the physical health, we are all worried about financial health. What are these securities? Before we go into the law, what are these securities? And whether these securities really can be called securities now in these times I leave it for you to wonder. Securities, as is understood in the securities law, securities. Over the period of time, we have included in them the derivatives, the units of something like mutual funds, the collective investment schemes, units of those funds, even government securities, even PSU bonds, etc., etc., etc. So basically, when we are dealing with security here, we are talking security in the context of investment in the financial market. Investment, if it is in the form of capital, for example, shares in a company. Investment, if it is in the form of loan, lending, borrowing, for example, debentures, bonds. Equally, investment, if it is in the form of mutual funds. These are all called securities. Now, just a little aside, that they were possibly called securities to begin with, because each time somebody issued a share or a debenture or a bond, it was backed by real assets. It was a paper issued by a company or an authority or government or PSU, because it is backed by the assets and the substantial things held by that company, capital which is used for industrial production by the company, etc. In today's times, I don't know whether this paper called security, how secured one would consider the security to be. But anyway, leaving that aside, the question is, what are these security laws and why the need for these security laws? Let me also share with you something that, given the advice about the participants, I'm going to keep the discussion to the very basic introductory level on the securities markets and security laws. I'm not going to go into the detail of any of the aspects, because each one of them may be a topic by itself otherwise. So there are basically 4 laws which are directly governing securities, and there are 3 or 4 other laws which incidentally then touch upon the aspect. The first in point of time obviously was Securities Contract Regulation Act 1956. Then we had, of course, the Companies Act, which was the earlier act of 1956, which is now replaced with the 2013 Act. Then we have Depositories Act, which is of 1996. And we have the SEBI Act, which is of 1992. Much of the discussion today we will have would hinge on the aspect of SEBI Act, SEBI laws, SEBI rules, SEBI regulations, etc. But I'd like to cover the other 3 first and then come to details under the SEBI Act. But even before we come to these acts and the details, because for us to have clarity on why these laws, once you understand the purpose of the law, the understanding the effect, the implementation becomes much easier. If public at large, if members of public at large have to invest their own personal funds in the form of share capital, in the form of loan, in the form of debentures, in the form of bonds, then either you know the person to whom you are giving the money personally, you have faith in him, you have trust in him, and therefore you give him the money because you know him, you know his credibility. But today the world has moved much further than that. You have companies listed, unlisted, you have public sector, you have private sector, you have debentures, you have loans. You look into the prospectus, you look into advertisement, you look at the rate of return, and you want to invest in that. You don't know the people who are managing it. You have never met them. You will never have opportunity to meet them. You have no idea personally of their background, their history, their credibility. So how does the business function in this kind of environment? How does anyone inspire confidence in an investor in this kind of environment? And this is how the securities laws have evolved. How to generate confidence, how to make or create an environment for investment, how to make sure that investors' money is protected, investors are not duped, how to make sure that investors have transparency about the business in which they have invested. They know how business is doing, how it is being conducted. They know somebody is looking after the affairs, and so on and so forth. So these securities laws, whichever way they are couched, basically the purpose is to facilitate investment, to give comfort, protection to the investor, and to regulate the entities who are the recipient of these funds through these securities, so that they don't misuse, they don't abuse, they conduct the business in orderly fashion, and money is put to the use for which it is given. It is not misused, it's not siphoned away, etc., etc. Given this background, let's start first with the Securities Contract Regulation Act. The name speaks for itself that the law, this act sought to regulate the dealing in securities, the buying and selling of securities. The act is a very small act. It basically gives powers to the government to notify on various aspects. And way back in 1956, the essential feature was that this buying and selling of securities should be for the purpose of a real investment. It should not turn into a speculative activity. As we all know, you can buy a share today for 10 rupees and it can be sold tomorrow for 20 rupees. That could be because the company has done very well and price has gone up. Or 20 rupees can become 10 rupees because you have a corona. One doesn't know, but it can happen. But that apart, if people were to allowed to speculate, speculation in commodities is well known for maybe 400 years worldwide, including in India. So if this paper securities were also to be used for a speculative purpose, then the whole investment angle would be defeated. So came the Securities Contract Regulation Act, which would govern how the securities will be dealt with, how they will be bought and sold, both if they are listed on the stock exchange and if they are not listed, etc. Idea was actual sale, actual delivery, actual payment to begin with. Of course, we have now gone much further. We have many other products, derivatives, forward contracts, etc., etc. But that was originally how it started. That is how originally the stock exchanges, which were functioning, for example, Bombay Stock Exchange was functioning for almost 140, 150 years now, got more regulated, got a better recognition, and got a statutory flavor. Companies Act has always governed this area because the securities are largely issued by the corporates in the form of shares, debentures, bonds, etc., etc. So everything, how the companies can issue such bonds or shares, in what manner they can issue it, what are the safeguards, what is the procedure, what are the permissions required. All this was originally part of the Companies Act, which is also now to an extent part of the new Companies Act of 2013, including, for example, as shareholder, we all get copy of the balance sheet because we must know what the company is doing. So it's part of somebody who is invested in a company knowing how this company is doing and what is the transparency. So to that extent, Companies Act looks into a lot of compliances and statutory safeguards as to how funds can be collected and how the funds have to be utilized, including management of companies, board of directors, etc., etc. The third relevant law is the Depositories Act of 1996. Now, we all have come across, even if you have not known the law as it is, we all have come across what is known as a demat account. Just as you have a bank account and you have your money in the bank account, you have a demat account where you hold your securities, your shares, your debentures. So basically, instead of holding the security in physical form, you have it in the form of a deposit with a bank or a financial institution, which, or maybe some other entities, which are all now called depositories under this Depositories Act. So effectively, what is a bank for holding money on your behalf in your bank account is a depository for holding the securities in your demat account. In very, very simple words, a depository is an entity with which you have an account who is holding the securities in your demat account. The securities that you hold are held by the depository in your demat account. You can transfer the securities from yourself to somebody else pretty much in the same fashion. Just as we issue a check for transfer of funds, we can issue a transfer slip for transfer of securities. When you sell the securities, you issue that slip. When you purchase the security, you receive that slip and the account is credited. So all the laws under the Depositories Act are basically intended to safeguard and make the whole process of in and out of the securities, holding of securities, very smooth, is to ensure that the players who are allowed to operate the depositories account, those who are holding your depositories account, do business for your benefit, for your safety, and do not do anything wrong which puts your deposit account with your securities, which puts your trading in your securities or buying or selling in your securities in any jeopardy. Now, all this actually then takes us to the SEBI Act. The Securities and Exchange Board actually was formed way back in 1988. Originally, it was formed as a board. In due course, in 1992, the new act, SEBI Act, was enacted. The board, in that sense, merged in the SEBI as the statutory authority by virtue of this act. So essentially, most of these aspects relating to securities market are now governed and regulated by the SEBI Act and by SEBI as an authority. Now, what is SEBI in effect? SEBI has a tripod kind of existence. First is investor protection. Second is orderly development of the stock market. By stock market, we mean a place where buying and selling of securities can take place. And the third is regulating the players who are involved in the securities market. Let me give you a very broad overview before I come into details. Investor protection, as I said, is necessary because unless the person who is a potential investor who proposes to invest the funds has got enough safeguards that his money is in right hands, that before he puts money, he knows where it is going, whether he can trust those people. After it is given, somebody is checking that it is being used for the purpose for it is being used. The people who are in management of company are behaving in the fashion they are supposed to behave. The people through whom I am investing are not taking me up the garden path. They are giving me the right information, the right advice, etc., etc., etc. That is the investor's point of view. Now, if investor is interested in investing, and if corporates or other bodies are interested in borrowing, then you need to create a market for that. So you have to facilitate creation of a market for that, so that both parties have a meeting point. Now that market does not necessarily only mean stock market, because even before you talk of stock market, when you float a security, when you say this company is issuing debentures, this PSU is issuing bonds, this mutual fund is now coming with a new scheme and you can invest in the mutual fund. At that stage itself, you are trying to create a market. You are trying to see that somebody is creating a opportunity for investment and somebody is interested in this. So that is the second aspect of orderly development of securities market. The third aspect, and which is very important, is the regulation. Because in this market today, as we know, there are a huge number of people, call them intermediaries or otherwise. The simplest is a share broker or a sub broker, which we all know. But if you were talking about a public issue, then you have a merchant banker, you have an underwriter, you have a lead manager, you have a banker, and so on and so forth. So it's a cluster of maybe half a dozen or more set of entities and people in different roles, which come together if a company has to go for a public issue and invite investments from public. These are all players, therefore, interested in and acting in the securities market. They are broadly in one category known as intermediaries, or some in different capacities. Therefore, how does one regulate them? How does one control them? Because there are maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands in number spread all across the country. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs could not have done directly. Policing obviously is not possible. So SEBI takes up that role. Now, how does SEBI discharge that function? The first and foremost that SEBI does, because SEBI is given umpteen powers, SEBI is also given powers to make regulations. SEBI has kind of enacted huge number of regulations dealing with various aspects. SEBI has powers to issue directions. SEBI has powers to control the market directly, indirectly, both. But how does it do it? The first and the foremost, what SEBI does is to say all these players who want to be involved in the securities market in any capacity, they must register themselves with SEBI. So even if you are a stockbroker, you need registration. If you are a merchant banker, you need registration. If you are an underwriter, you need registration. If you are a lead manager, you need registration, etc., etc., etc. So there are certain criteria when you want to register yourself in different capacity under different category. So you will make an application. Your application will be considered based on the objective criteria. If you are a merchant banker, what is your experience? What is your capacity? What is your financial capacity? If you are an underwriter, likewise, etc., etc. Then there is, apart from registration, which is just the beginning, if you are granted registration, then starting from code of conduct down the line, how each entity in each category must conduct its business in the securities market is provided in detail in those regulations. So each regulation, starting from registration to say what it covers, to defining what are its parameters, to defining do's and do nots, and then defining how each intermediary, how each entity which is registered under that is to conduct its business for the securities market. That is how SEBI basically seeks to cover the entire area on this subject. Now, to tell you just for example, only in relation to issue of shares or debentures or securities, there are a host of about 12 different regulations covering different aspects, including how once you issue a security, it is to be listed, how it is to be delisted, how the trading has to take place, etc., etc. Similarly, in relation to intermediaries, that is brokers, sub-brokers, there are again about a dozen regulations dealing with portfolio managers, debenture trustees, bankers, merchant bankers, underwriters, registrars to the issue, share transfer registrars, etc., etc. Each category, because it does a particular function, it discharges a particular function in the whole web of the securities market. Its functioning is then governed and regulated by SEBI through those regulations. I'm not going to get into the details of most of these regulations, but I would like you to get a hang of maybe just half a dozen specific regulations which will be of some interest to you as lawyers. Is that once shares are issued, once shares are listed, same for debentures, etc., etc., the investor is now a stakeholder in the company. He may have put in a small amount of 10,000 rupees. He may have put in 10 crores. He may have put in 10% of the equity of the company, which could be a large amount. We heard a few days back that 10% of equity in Reliance costed some $7 billion. So it could be any investment from 10,000 to anywhere. But that investor is not sitting on the board of the company. That investor is not managing the affairs of the company. That investor has no say in the day-to-day management of the company. So how is the investor to be insulated against a host of possible wrongdoings? And there are regulations in relation to that. For example, one of the regulations is what is popularly known as takeover code. I have invested in a company where I know the management is Mr. XYZ, whose background I know, whose background I have been given. But supposing suddenly somebody wants to do a takeover, so company remains the same, name remains the same, business remains the same, but the people in management, the promoters suddenly change. Now, I do not have any background of those other promoters. I may or may not want to invest with those new promoters. If they were the promoters originally, I may not have invested. There can be many other considerations. So this takeover code is basically protecting the interests of investors in the sense, if there has to be a substantial investment by a new set of people, which directly or indirectly can lead to a takeover, not necessarily actual takeover, lead to a takeover. There is a very interesting word used there in creeping acquisition. You can acquire 5 or 10% every year slowly to get into the management of the company. So there are detailed regulations there that if you were to get into investment into a company in this fashion, which can directly or indirectly lead to a takeover, then how investor interest is protected. Shorn of all the details at certain stages, at different milestones, such a person who is investing in the company would then be required to make a public offer to the investors at large that if you want to sell your investments, if you want to sell your securities to me, you can sell it and I'll be obliged to buy it. The regulations not only provide for, therefore, a public offer, but the price has to be fair. It can't be any price that he chooses to give you. So what would be that fair price? How it will be determined? What would be the procedure? Etc. etc. is also governed by the takeover code, takeover regulations. So the investor has this safety or security that even if there's a change in management or change in promoters in this fashion, I will not be obliged to continue with the company. Choice is mine whether to continue or whether in a public offer divest my investment. Similarly, there's another regulation which is very commonly a matter of dispute or discussion, which is about prohibition of insider trading. Because it is quite possible that people who are in management of the company, people who are promoters, who know the affairs of the company, therefore who know that in next 10 days, 3 days, 30 days, 1 month, some development is going to happen, which will suddenly shoot up the price of the shares, or which will suddenly hit the price of the shares, they'll come down. He has the advantage because he is in know of the affairs of the company. He is in conduct of the affairs of the company, or maybe it is his brother, wife, sister, mother, father, so they obviously have insider information through him. Promoter is normally not alone, it's a group where all the persons and entities connected with them are treated as part of promoter group. So it is possible that if company is going to get some new contract, huge contract, some new big business, some new license, some new patent registration, some new drug approval by the ICMR or FDA in US, which will suddenly jack up the prices. It is possible that taking advantage of that information, they may want to buy the shares while public does not know about it. Now, that's not fair because you are not playing at the same level. SEBI has tried to bring about a level playing field in that. Somebody who is not so well informed, not because of his fault, but because he is not in management, as compared to somebody who has all the information, who is an insider. Can he take advantage? The answer is no. There are detailed regulations as to how an insider is not supposed to trade in shares during certain periods. That is from the time when some price sensitive information comes into being, which comes to his knowledge, till that information becomes public. So the key word here is price sensitive information. So once that price sensitive information has somehow come into being, which obviously the directors or managers or people in management or promoters will know, then they are not supposed to deal with the shares of that company. There is something like opening the window, closing the window. There is something like an officer within the company who is supposed to seek compliances of these issues. There are detailed guidelines. But the idea is to ensure that there is a level playing field. to ensure that those who have special knowledge being within the affairs of the company do not have any advantage over the members of public at large, the other investors, and they are all playing on the same field. That is broadly for you the prohibition of insider trading. Then there are regulations dealing with buyback of shares. There are regulations dealing with benefits to employees, because while the management decides, the people in management of the company decide when to do a buyback. People in management decide when to give some ESOPs or benefits to the employees. But everything must be done in such a fashion that investor interest is protected, that this is within permissible limits, that this is for the better conduct of the business, but not for undue or unfair advantage to any player, be it promoters, be it any management senior employee who's going to get ESOPs, or be it somebody who is somewhere in this category and who otherwise potentially is in a position to reap better benefits at the cost of the company or investors or public at large. Then you have these other regulations which are known as PFUTP, Prevention of Fraud and Unfair Trade Practice. Now, this is another regulation which is commonly being invoked by SEBI, because for whatever reason, in business, unfairness, unethical practices, etc., are not so uncommon these days. These regulations cover a very vast area, because you are not talking about fraudulent practices, and fraud has no barriers. Fraud can happen in maybe 1,000 different ways. Unfair trade practices, again, in a way similar, in a way covering some different aspects also. The simplest example could be, and this has happened, and there are judgments dealing with that. Therefore, I'm giving you of an example of a fraud or unfair trade practice. The company makes a public issue. Company makes a public issue of 50 crores. So the requirement is that unless you receive 90% subscription, the issue will not go through, issue will fail. So you must have subscription of at least 45 crores, for example. What the promoters can do is that they know that if we show that in first 2 days, 30 crore investment is already made, people will feel interested. They will say this company has a lot of value, lot of investors are coming. So the remaining 15-20 crores will come. Now, maybe you have just created a loan scenario, got money from the bank, brought in as a subscription for share capital. 50 crores come in, shares are issued. The minute shares are issued, company gives the 30 crores back to the bank, which had lent the money. So what you have done is you have created a facade that a 50 crore capital is issued. Company now holds capital of 50 crores. Company is going to do business of 50 crores. Effectively, 30 crores came from bank, went back to bank. 20 crores came from public. Public does not know what you're doing with that 20 crores. Public thinks you're doing business with 50 crores. And after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, the business is either found to be non-existing, not so completely, but in substantial terms, or the assets are missing, or that the funds are missing, or in rare cases, even promoters have eloped. This looks a little far-fetched, but cases like this has happened. I have defended some such cases, and I have appeared for SEBI supporting actions against such cases, both ways. And they are in very large numbers. They also happen in international transactions. They also happen not just in the securities market in India, but they happen abroad. You might have come across the global depositories, GDRs, which is another way of shares of Indian companies getting listed in the stock exchanges outside India. There they are listed in the form of GDRs, and GDRs represent the Indian shares. So even in those kind of uh, issues and securities markets, these fraudulent activities have come. But this is one extreme example. There can be any number of fraudulent activities. Uh, Supposing you say, I'm going to purchase machinery worth 50 crores, therefore I have an issue of 200 crores, land worth so much, something else worth so much. It turns out that you have purchased machinery from your group company, which is second hand, whose value is only 20 crores, but you paid 50 crores. There could be host of things, host of examples. So idea is that people in management do not commit a fraud on the company, not commit a fraud on the investors. Investors' money is used for the business for which it is given. So these PFUTP regulations are essentially dealing with the aspect of fraud or any other unfair trade practice, which if it was your own business, if it was your own money, and there were no outside investors, you would not do to yourself. You will not throw your good money for bad money. You will not waste your money. You will not buy a machinery worth 20 crores or 50 crores. Or you will not give a commission to somebody of 5% or 10% when you are not required to give it, etc., etc. So what you would do for your own business in your most bona fide manner is what is expected of the management of a company to do its business with. So those are the standards by which the aspects of fraudulent or unfair trade practices would be governed. Then comes the regulations relating to disclosures, because the securities are listed on the exchanges, securities are traded on the exchanges. Now, if some new information comes, some new development happens, including your quarterly results, half yearly results, audited accounts, which is mandatory, of course. How is it that anybody who's wanting to deal with those securities, buying, selling, deciding for himself to buy, not to buy, etc., must be as informed as anybody else? So there are disclosure requirements meant for that, which require certain periodical disclosures and which require certain specific disclosures from the company or the promoters, etc., so that anybody who is interested in the security, buying, selling, potentially selling, has full information in that regard, and he is as well informed as anybody else who is dealing in the security. Those are the disclosure regulations, disclosure requirements. Similarly, you have for corporate governance, etc. And how does now SEBI therefore make sure that all these regulations are complied with? So SEBI has its own methods. For example, when you are proposing to issue shares or debentures, you are supposed to issue a prospectus. The prospectus has to be sent to SEBI. They don't call it approval, but for vetting. After vetting, when they give you a nod, then only you can issue an advertisement and then invite investment. So the parameters of investment, the extent of investment, the price or the price band as the case may be, the utilization of funds, who are the promoters, what are the activities, where is the plant, where is the machinery, where is the office, all those details become part of the prospectus. That prospectus is then vetted by the lead manager to the issue who has the responsibility. Then it is vetted by the SEBI. If they find certain corrections, certain more disclosures, certain caveats, they put it. If they don't find it proper, they don't kind of give a nod for it. If they find it proper with or without suggestions, corrections, they do it. So that becomes the charter. That becomes the stated disclosure of the company, how, why, where, and when they are going to use the funds which are being invested by the members. That then becomes the basis for SEBI to regulate it. SEBI can say, and SEBI does say, within 7 days of the issue, you will give me this disclosure. Within 1 month, you'll give me this disclosure. Within 3 months, you'll give me this disclosure. So SEBI is then getting disclosure in the form of declarations, confirmations from the company, from the management that we are acting in accordance with what is disclosed to public. This is what we have done. And of course, then every quarter, every 6 months, every year, results, audits, etc. If anything goes wrong, SEBI can take action on its own. SEBI can take action on complaints. SEBI can take action for not furnishing information. SEBI can call upon any party, any entity, including company, to give information. SEBI has the same powers as the civil court. SEBI can punish for not furnishing information. SEBI can compel you to give information. Depending upon the fact situation, SEBI can then order investigation, can order inquiry. SEBI can also pass what we as lawyers commonly know ad interim orders. SEBI can, in rare cases, but if not so rare in my understanding, SEBI can pass ex parte ad interim orders, which means even without notice, they can pass orders to say that this is urgently required, that this is necessary in the interest of the market. One of the most common order passed in this fashion is to stop that person from accessing the stock market, which means the broker cannot act as broker anymore. The lead manager cannot act as lead manager anymore. The company cannot go for any further public issue or any further investment through public issue. These are different facets of accessing or purpose of accessing the stock market. So SEBI has very vast powers. If they do issue such a ex parte ad interim order, it is coupled with safeguards. The order will be treated also as a show cause notice. The concerned persons will be then given an opportunity to file a reply. Then they will be given a hearing. And after the hearing, SEBI will pass an order which is commonly termed as confirmatory order. According to me, this is a misnomer because it is not necessary that SEBI must pass an order confirming the ad interim order. They can even vary it, vacate it, liquidate it, depending on what they see in the facts. Although in practice, one finds that this rarely happens. Probably that is why they have given it that precasted name, confirmatory order. But name apart, meaning is that after giving a due hearing, the ex parte order can either be confirmed or vacated or modified. But even that order, mind you, very often or in most cases only an interim order, because the inquiry is still going on, investigation is still going on. Only that the ad interim which was ex parte is now after hearing. So in a sense, though it's a statutory authority, it's not a court, but the powers are very vast. At the closure of the inquiry, at the closure of the investigation, based on what its findings are, SEBI can then issue a show cause notice. In the show cause, they will have to say what are your not just relevant facts, but what are your violations, which regulation, which provision, which section is being violated, for what purpose, for what reason, what are its consequences, means what is the proposed action which SEBI seeks to take. They want to debar you from accessing the market, they want to put penalty on you, or some other action, etc., etc. All that has to come in show cause notice, giving opportunity to all the concerned persons to reply to that. Then thereafter there is a hearing, and after the hearing an order is passed. One of the facets of these orders is also is what is now termed as disgorgement of unlawful benefits, which means by unfair trading, by fraudulent means, or by taking undue advantage of insider information that you have, if you have done certain activities dealing in shares, by reason of which you have made certain profits, undue profits, which you would normally not have made, then you can even be called upon to make good those profits and pay that amount to SEBI. That's known as disgorgement. That money then is credited by the SEBI in the Investor Protection Fund and used in its own way under the statute for protection of investors. That's the very broad gamut of the securities laws. Darshit and Saurabh from my chambers have taken trouble to do a detailed note, which I've shared with Siddharth, which I'm sure you can all access, and Siddharth will make sure that it is made available to everybody, those who are interested. But just to give some finishing touches without getting too much into details, there is a detailed procedure for filing appeals to a appellate tribunal called Securities Appellate Tribunal, SAT, which obviously has a seat in Mumbai. It's a 3-member tribunal. So all orders of SEBI are appealable before SAT. SEBI also has its own grievance redressal mechanism, before which any investor, any player, any concerned person can make a complaint, and SEBI is supposed to look into it through its grievance redressal forum. From the order passed by the Securities Appellate Tribunal, SAT, there is also appeal possible to Supreme Court, but essentially on question of law. So there is no appeal to the High Court in this case. It goes straight to the Supreme Court. SEBI has its own very large set of offices. At the highest level, the people who are passing these orders are known as full-time members. Otherwise, they also have what are known as adjudicating officers, AOs, who look into violations up to certain level, penalties, etc., etc. It will be of interest to you that even mutual funds, through which a lot of small investors, medium investors invest their money, which is not a direct investment in the stock market, but which is investment to a mutual fund who in turn is buying or selling securities and coming in the securities market, are also equally governed by SEBI. The third category, collective investment schemes, which means good old days we had those plantation schemes, etc. But there could be possibly somebody says that you all contribute in the form of units and we will buy land or we'll buy XYZ, and that's your investment, will give you return. Even that is governed by SEBI. So that's broadly the concept in relation to securities market. As I said, I don't want to get into details of each one of them. And one latest edition, which is frankly not securities, but which by deeming fiction is now made part of securities, is commodities. Commodities, as you know, it could be anything from wheat, sugar to anything. The buying and selling in physical form we are all aware of, but there are commodity exchanges which also facilitate buying and selling of commodities. I'm sorry. Now that buying and selling, when it is done on the commodity exchange, also what the exchange issues is basically a paper that yes, you have bought 5,000 kgs of sugar or 5 tons of sugar or 50,000 tons of sugar. So you have all known about some scams relating to commodities market also. There was Forward Market Commission FMC, which was governing this field, which has now been disbanded. Those powers have also been conferred on SEBI. And for this purpose, they have done amendment to the definition of securities, and even commodities are now covered. So commodities are deemed to be securities, and therefore the dealing in the commodities through this market, where it is in paper form, is also now governed by SEBI in the SEBI Act. I hope this discussion interests you enough in the subject. It's a vast subject, developing subject, good opportunities, and I'm sure a lot of newcomers, beginners in profession will be interested. My idea was to give you an overview so that when you read any law, any regulation, any judgment, the judgments are in now hundreds. On most topics, maybe 2 dozen good judgments. On many topics, maybe 2 or 3 good Supreme Court judgments. That it makes sense. Everything is with a purpose and with the end, and with a view to bring this balance. So thank you, all of you, for giving me this patient hearing. And thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Law Chambers. And thank you, the entire team, for giving me this opportunity.
Right. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and knowledge on today's topic, sir. The session was very informative. Thank you, sir. And we look forward to many sessions by you in the coming future.
Thank you. Thank you.